This is Justine Spargo recording Chapter 6, Relationship Development and Therapeutic Communication for Learning Plan 5 in Nursing Health Promotions. All right, so our objectives today are to define a nurse-client relationship, list the phases of a therapeutic relationship, list things that could hinder communication, practice therapeutic communication techniques, and discuss active listening techniques. All right, so the nurse-client relationship is the foundation on which a psychiatric nursing is developed or established. It is a relationship in which both the nurse and the client must recognize each other as a unique and important person. It's also a relationship in which mutual learning occurs. And the therapeutic interpersonal relationship is the process by which nurses provide care for clients in need of psychosocial intervention. A therapeutic relationship is an interaction between two people, usually a caregiver and a care receiver, in which input from both participants contributes to a climate of healing, growth, promotion, and/or illness prevention. The nurse-client relationship is a therapeutic one in which both parties perceive the other as human beings. The nurse-client relationship is goal-oriented, and ideally, the nurse and the client both decide what goals will be used, essentially. And most often, the goal is directed at learning and growth in order to bring about some type of positive change in the client's life. The goals of a therapeutic relationship should be based on a problem-solving model, meaning that a problem should be clearly identified and both the client and the nurse should work towards resolving the problem. The nurse should work to identify what is troubling the client, encourage the client to discuss changes he or she would like to make, discuss which changes are possible and which are not, help the client explore feelings about things that cannot be changed, and discuss the alternative strategies for creating changes. We need to also weigh the benefits and consequences of the alternatives, assist the client to select an alternative, encourage the client to implement the change, and provide positive feedback for the client's attempt to create change, and assist the client to evaluate outcomes of the change. All right, so let's check your understanding. Which is the primary nursing goal when establishing a therapeutic relationship with a client? To promote client growth, develop the nurse's personal identity, to establish a purposeful social interaction, or to develop communication skills. The answer here is A. The goals of the therapeutic nursing interaction is to promote client insight and behavioral change directed towards client growth. All right, so several factors that enhance the achievement of a therapeutic relationship have been identified. So rapport implies special feelings on the part of both the client and the nurse based on acceptance, warmth, friendliness, common interests, and a sense of trust and non-judgmental attitude. To trust one another, one must feel confidence in the person's presence, reliability, integrity, veracity, and sincere desire to provide assistance when requested. Trust is the basis of a therapeutic relationship. The nurse working in psychiatry must perfect the skills that fosters the development of trust. So trust is like huge when it comes to this. To show respect is to believe in the dignity and worth of an individual regardless of his or her unacceptable behavior. The attitude is non-judgmental and the respect is unconditional, and that it does not depend on the behavior of the client to meet certain standards. The concept of genuineness refers to the nurse's ability to be open, honest, and real in interactions with clients. To be real is to be aware of what one is experiencing internally and to allow the quality of this inner experiencing to be apparent in the therapeutic relationship. And finally, empathy is the ability to see beyond outward behavior and to understand the situation from the client's point of view. With empathy, the nurse can accurately perceive and understand the meaning and relevance of clients' thoughts and feelings. The therapeutic interpersonal relationship is the means by which the nursing process is implemented. Through the relationship, problems are identified and resolution is sought. Tasks of the relationship have been categorized into 4 phases. The pre-interaction phase involves preparation for the first meeting with the client. Tasks include obtaining available information about the client from his or her chart, significant others, and other health team members and examining one's feelings, fears, and anxiety about working with a particular client. The orientation phase is when the nurse and the client become acquainted with each other. Tasks during this phase include creating an environment for the establishment of trust and rapport, establishing a contract for intervention that details the expectation and responsibilities of both parties, gathering assessment information, identifying the client's strengths and limitations, formulating nursing diagnosis, setting goals that are mutually agreeable, developing a plan of action that is realistic, and exploring feelings of both the client and the nurse. The working phase is when the therapeutic work of the relationship actually takes place. Tasks during this phase include maintaining the trust and rapport that was established during the orientation phase and promoting the client's insights and perceptions of reality, problem solving, overcoming resistant behaviors on the part of the client, and continuously evaluating the progress. Transference and counterference are potential issues in the working phase. So transference occurs when the client unconsciously displaces to the nurse feelings formed towards a person from his or her past. Transference can interfere with therapeutic interaction when feelings being expressed include anger and hostility. Anger towards the nurse can be manifested by uncooperativeness and resistance to the therapy. Transference can also take the form of overwhelming affection for the nurse or excessive dependency on the nurse. Now, countertransference refers to the nurse's behavioral and emotional response to the client. These responses may be related to unresolved feelings towards significant others from the nurse's past, or they may be generated in response to transference feelings on the part of the client. The termination phase is the end of the nurse-client relationship. Termination of the relationship may occur for a variety of reasons. The mutually agreed on goals may have been reached. The client may be discharged from the hospital, or in the case of a student nurse, it may be the end of the clinical rotation. All right, so let's check your understanding. A client threatens to kill himself, his wife, and their children, and if the wife follows through with divorce proceedings. During the pre-interaction phase of the nurse-client relationship, which interaction should the nurse employ? Acknowledging the client's actions and encouraging alternative behaviors, establishing rapport and developing treatment goals, providing community resources and aggression management, or exploring personal thought and feelings that may adversely impact the provision of care. So D here was the correct answer. In the pre-interaction phase, the nurse must clarify personal attitudes, values, and beliefs to become aware of how these may affect the nurse's ability to care for the various clients. This occurs before the nurse meets the client. Boundaries are borders and limitations in a relationship. They determine the extent of acceptable limits. Many different types of boundaries exist, such as material boundaries, social boundaries, personal boundaries, professional boundaries. It is important for both the nurse and the client to understand those boundaries when you're making that relationship. Interpersonal communication. So this is a transaction between the sender and the receiver. In the transactional mode of communication, both participants simultaneously perceive each other, listen to each other, and mutually are involved in creating a meaning in a relationship. Both the sender and receiver can bring certain pre-existing conditions to the exchange that influence both the intended message and the way in which it's interpreted. Values, attitudes, and beliefs are learned ways of thinking. So children generally adapt the value systems and internalize the attitudes and beliefs of their parents. Children may retain this way of thinking into adulthood or develop different set of attitudes and values as they mature. Values and attitudes and beliefs can influence communication in numerous ways. For example, prejudice is expressed verbally through negative stereotyping. Cultural mores, norms, ideas, and customs provide the basis for our way of thinking. Cultural values are learned and differ from society to society. Religion can also influence communication. Symbolic gestures, such as wearing a cross around the neck or hanging a crucifix on the wall, can communicate an individual's religious beliefs. Studies of nonverbal indicators of social status or power have suggested that high status persons are associated with gestures that communicate their higher power positions. For example, they use less eye contact, have more relaxed posture, use louder voice pitch, place hands on hips more frequently, are power dressers, like they have greater height, they may maintain more distance when communicating with individuals considered to be of lower status. Gender influences the manner in which individuals communicate. Most cultures have gender signals that are recognized as either masculine or feminine, and provide a basis for distinguishing between members of each gender. Roles have historically been identified as either male or female. For example, in the United States, masculinity typically was communicated through such roles as husband, father, breadwinner, doctor, lawyer, or engineer. And traditional female roles included wife, mother, homemaker, nurse, teacher, or secretary. Gender signals are beginning to change in the United States as gender roles become less distinct. Age influences communication, especially during adolescence. Words such as dude, groovy, coolest, clueless, awesome, cool, and wasted have had special meaning for different generations of adolescents. Technological age has produced a whole new language for today's adolescents as well. Developmental influences on communication may relate to psychological alterations. One example is in American Sign Language, the system of unique gestures used by many people who are deaf or hearing impaired. Individuals who are blind at birth never learn the subtle nonverbal gesticulations that accompany language and can totally change the meaning of a spoken word. Nonverbal communication. So components of nonverbal communication, like physical appearance and dress, body movement, posture, touch, facial expression, eye behavior, and vocal cues or paralanguage are all really important for nonverbal communication. They can say a whole lot without you saying anything. So always remember how you show yourself or your facial expression, things like that. Hayes and Larson identified a number of techniques to assist the nurse in interacting more therapeutically with their clients. These should serve to enhance development of a therapeutic nurse-client relationship. All right, so here are a few. We'll just go through some of them. So using silence allows clients to take control of the discussion if he or she so desires. Accepting conveys positive regard. Giving, recognition, acknowledging, and indicating awareness. Offering self, so making oneself available. Giving broad openings, so allows the client to select a topic. Offer general leads, encourages the client to continue. Place the event in time or sequence, which clarifies the relationship of events and time. Making observations, so verbalizing what is observed or perceived. Encouraging descriptions of perceptions, so asking client to verbalize what's being perceived. Encouraging comparison, asking a client to compare similarities and differences in ideas, experiences, or interpersonal relationships. Restating lets the client know whether an expressed statement has been understood. And then reflecting directs questions or feelings back to the client so that they may recognize and accept. Several approaches are considered to be barriers to open communication between nurse and client. Hayes and Larson's also identified a number of these techniques. So nurses should recognize and eliminate the use of these patterns in their relationships with clients. So avoiding these communication barriers enhance nurse-client relationship. So giving reassurance may discourage client from further expression of feeling if client believes the feelings will only be downplayed or ridiculed. Rejecting, so refusing to consider client's ideas or behaviors. Approving or disapproving implies that the nurse has the right to pass judgment on the goodness or badness of a client's behavior. Agreeing or disagreeing implies that the nurse has the right to pass judgment on whether the client's ideas or opinions are right or wrong. Giving advice implies that the nurse knows what's best for the client and the client is incapable of self-direction. Probing is pushing for answers to issues that the client does not wish to discuss, causes the client to feel used and valued only for what is shared with the nurse. Defending, to defend what the client has criticized, implies that the client has no right to express ideas, opinions, or feelings. Request an explanation Asking why implies the client must defend his or her behavior or feelings. And indicating the existence of an external source of power encourages client to project blame for his or her thoughts or behaviors on others. So again, you want to avoid all of those. All right, the concept of active listening. To listen actively is to be attentive and really desire to hear and understand what the client is saying, both verbally and nonverbally. With active listening, the nurse communicates acceptance and respect for the client, and trust is enhanced. A climate is established within a relationship that promotes openness and honest expression. All right, so the acronym SOLAR is a good one to use for active listening. So S is sit squarely facing the client. This gives a message that the nurse is there to listen and is interested in what the client has to say instead of one foot out the door and one foot in the door. Says, I gotta go. O is to observe an open posture. Posture is considered open when arms and legs remain uncrossed. This suggests that the nurse is open to what the client has to say. With a closed posture, the nurse can convey some somewhat defensive stance, possibly invoking a similar response to the client. So arms crossed or legs crossed and one foot out the door. L is lean forward towards the client. This conveys to the client that you're involved in the interaction, interested in what's being said, and making a sincere effort to be attentive. And E is establish eye contact. Direct eye contact is another behavior that conveys the nurse's involvement and willingness to listen to what the client has to say. The absence of eye contact or the constant shifting of eye contact gives the message that the nurse is not really interested in what's being said. So those are all good things for you to do. So again, remember the little acronym SOLAR. And that's the end of this PowerPoint slide. I do want to encourage you guys to practice your therapeutic communication because it's one thing that is a little bit more difficult on a case-by-case basis. So try finding some questions that have therapeutic communication in them to help you get better. And we'll go through some probably in class.